In the Passover Haggadah, the so-called wicked son sitting at the Seder table asks the question, what does this service mean to you? And we're supposed to answer this child by setting his teeth on edge, the Haggadah tells us, and saying to him, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. For me and not for him, because if he had been there, he would not have been worthy of being redeemed. Now, before I go any further, you may be asking yourself why I'm bringing up Passover this morning, since it isn't even Tu B'Shvat yet. Good question. The answer is that the question of the wicked son is taken right out of the Torah portion that we read this week. It is found in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 26. But the context of chapter 12 in Exodus of this supposedly wicked child's question makes the question a very reasonable one, a question that any of our children might ask. The context for this question is the very first Passover ritual, when the Israelites sacrificed a lamb, took the blood and put it on the doorposts of their tents so that the angel of death would pass over their homes. And then Moses instructs the Israelites that they are to perform this ritual every year, even after they settle in the land of Israel. And then Moses says, when your children ask you, what does this ritual, this service mean to you? That's the question of the supposedly wicked son. Moses tells the Israelites, you should say it is because of the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and saved our homes. In context, the question is really reasonable. Moses does not consider this question to be wicked or evil at all. It's a normal question a child would ask when he or she sees adults acting strangely, like putting blood on the doorposts of their homes. It's normal to ask, what the heck are you doing? And even for the so-called wicked son at the Passover Seder, it would seem to be quite a normal question to ask. What are you doing? Why do we dip twice? Why are you reclining? Why do we eat bitter herbs? Why do you eat matzah? What is this all about? What does this all mean? So if the question is so normal, why do we consider the wicked son to be so bad? It's true, the Haggadah tells us that he excludes himself from the community because he says, what does this mean to you? And he doesn't say, what does this mean to us? But after all, he is quoting from the Torah, and it's from the book of Exodus. The Torah says, what do you mean, not us? We should actually applaud this child for being so brilliant that he quotes the Torah so well. And besides, why should we assume he meant to exclude himself? It's a normal way to phrase the question. The child sees the parent doing something strange or unusual and asks, why are you doing that? So why is the wicked son considered wicked? Well, it turns out that this story, this paragraph in the Haggadah about the four sons, appears in other places in rabbinic literature. And in one other source, the wicked son adds some words to the question. What does this service mean to you? And then he adds, what is this burden that you keep putting on us every year? Now that's an entirely different question, a different way to word it, and it does put the question in an unfavorable light. I don't know if we should characterize it as wicked, though, since I think we all know people who ask this very question as well. The family sits down to the Seder table, and no sooner does the service begin when someone at the table starts complaining, enough talking already, when do we eat? Why do we have to read this boring book every year that you keep making us read? Where do we get to eat the knedlach? This storytelling is quite burdensome. Why do we need to do it at all? To understand how this version of the question is related to the question in the Torah, though, we need to understand the double meaning of a Hebrew word. In Hebrew, the Torah question is, Ma ha'avodah hazot lechem? What is this avodah to you? And the Hebrew word avodah can either mean worship or ritual. For instance, when we're coming together this morning to pray, we're performing an avodah, a worship service. When the temple stood and sacrifices were offered, those sacrifices were called an avodah, an act of worshiping God. And the Seder ritual is also considered an avodah, a way to worship God. But avodah can also mean work. And specifically, it's used in the book of Exodus to mean the work of the Israelite slaves in Egypt. And the related Hebrew word eved means a slave. So the child could be asking an innocent question, what does this ritual mean? What does this ritual mean to you? Or he could be asking a less innocent question, what is the meaning of this slave's task that you're forcing us to do? And if we take this idea one step further, he's asking, you, dear Father, say that we're doing this because God took us out of slavery in Egypt, and we're now free people. But I don't see us being a free people at all. All that has really happened is we have substituted one taskmaster, the Pharaoh, for another, God. Instead of Pharaoh ordering us around like slaves, we now have God ordering us around, putting all kinds of restrictions on our lives, what we can eat and can't eat, when we can work and when we have to stop working, making us do all kinds of things we'd rather not do, like reading this silly book when all I want to do is eat matzo ball soup. I don't see any reason to celebrate. We're not really a free people at all. What's the point of this ritual that you're making me do? Now, one of my teachers, Eliezer Diamond, has suggested that this also is actually a serious question, one that deserves a serious answer, especially for us living in America, where individual freedom and autonomy are so deeply cherished. The fact is that we Jews consider the Torah to be a valuable book of instruction, requiring us to study it carefully and to live by its teachings. Do we not therefore subscribe to a form of servitude, one that is in conflict with the norms and values of American culture, and more fundamentally, which contradicts our celebration of liberation? We're not doing whatever we want to do. We're doing what the Torah and Jewish tradition instructs us to do. So in answering this serious question, Rabbi Diamond goes back to the Torah's description of the 10 plagues to see what the difference is between being commanded to serve Pharaoh and being commanded to serve God. He points out that Pharaoh is a destroyer of the Israelite family. First, he exhausts the men by giving them backbreaking labor. Later, after Moses' first unsuccessful plea to him, Pharaoh plays a cruel joke on the men. He responds to the reports that the labor is too difficult by refusing to give them straw, thereby making their task not only difficult, but actually impossible. Finally, even this is not enough for Pharaoh. All the male children of Israel must be destroyed. The Israelite family, and therefore the Israelite nation, will no longer exist. God, on the other hand, understands Pharaoh's plan, and therefore his first commandment to the Israelites involves lifting Israel out of bondage by restoring the dignity and integrity of the Israelite family. As Rabbi Strauss mentioned last night, God gives the Israelites a calendar, telling them from when to count the first month. That is to say, he returns the meaningfulness of time to them. A slave has no control over time. His time is not his own. The commandment of this month shall mark for you the beginning of months, restores to the Israelites the gift of time. The Passover ceremony itself restores family in at least two senses. First, the Passover lamb is to be eaten by the household. The family gathers around the table to share a meal, something unfortunately many families today rarely get to do. Second, the bond between parents and child is strengthened as one generation tells the story of the Exodus to the next. Structures and authority are not inherently bad, Rabbi Diamond concludes. The question is, who is commanding and why? Pharaoh is the archetype of self-centered, destructive authority. Living in a post-Holocaust world, we need no one to tell us where such tyranny may end. If we confuse all authority with the authority of tyranny, however, we're immeasurably impoverished thereby. God's voice, as embodied in the Torah, also speaks to us in the voice of authority, but the intended goal is diametrically opposed to that of tyranny. This authority wishes to awaken us the force of good, the force of our conscience. It calls upon us to serve God so that we may find all that is good within ourselves. Indeed, only by doing so can we face the tyranny with the strength to withstand it. I would add that in a sense, the question of the so-called wicked son, the question that so many of us really do ask on the night of the Seder, is really a tragic one. It assumes that the ritual of recounting their exodus from Egypt and the miraculous survival of the Jewish people for thousands of years is a burden. The ritual that we do on the first night of Passover is actually the quintessential opportunity to express who we are as Jews, why we care about our Jewish identity, and the joy of celebrating a covenant with God that our people have cherished for centuries. As another of my teachers, David Golinkin, has said, the Torah and the mitzvot express the eternal covenant made between God and the Jewish people. But that covenant, that contract that we have with God must be renewed every generation. Every time we observe a commandment or halakha, we continually renew our covenant, our brit with God. Indeed, in the Passover Haggadah itself, we read, in every generation we must look upon ourselves as if we personally have come out of Egypt. And the Haggadah then brings proof from this idea from the verse in the Torah that is used to answer the wicked son's question. You shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went out from Egypt. The Torah tells us that all future generations are supposed to tell the story in the first person. I went out of Egypt. Why should we do that today when none of us took place in an exodus from 3,000 years ago? Because today, each of us is renewing our relationship with God. We are reliving the event as if it happened to us personally. The Passover Seder is perhaps the single most universally observed Jewish ritual, not only in our generation, but throughout history. As such, it uniquely represents the opportunity for us to connect spiritually with Jews all over the world today, as well as all generations of Jews since the beginning of our history. What binds us together is not the matzo ball soup, though that may have a binding effect on our intestines. What identifies us as Jews is precisely the laws and commandments, the customs and practices of the Jewish people. It is the telling of our shared history, the hallmark of the Passover Seder. It is the renewal of our covenant with our people to share a common destiny. That is what the Seder is all about. Perhaps we waste this opportunity by insisting on reading each word in the book, mouthing the syllables as though they were some incomprehensible incantation, without really thinking about what they actually mean to us. Forget the specific words in the book. The essence of the Seder is supposed to be telling our story and renewing our covenant. It is supposed to be a very personal event and a spiritually meaningful family activity as well. The child's 4 questions that we have the youngest child recite are really supposed to be conversation starters. We're supposed to try and answer those questions and then ask more questions and then argue about those answers to those questions. We're supposed to ask, as the so-called wicked son does ask, what the heck are we doing here? But then we're supposed to try and answer that question. Why should we care about being Jewish? Why should we want to seek God, to have a relationship with God, and do this through the lens of our Jewish faith? Seen from this perspective, the ritual is not a burden at all, but an all too rare opportunity to explore our faith. The difference between serving Pharaoh and serving God is tremendous. Sure, each of them demands something from us, but the all-important question is, what is demanded? In the case of Pharaoh, and to some extent life in the modern world, what is demanded is back-breaking labor, or in the white-collar business offices, mind-bending labor. Sure, we are productive, and we do need to put food on our tables, but Pharaoh sought to destroy his workforce with burdensome labor. He sought to destroy the workers' allegiance to their families and their people, and to break their spirit. And similarly, we must guard ourselves today against enslaving ourselves to our own work. On the other hand, God's tasks for us are in fact liberating. The mitzvot enhance our allegiance to our family and our people. They sanctify our lives and give them meaning. They nurture our spirits and improve our character. And they provide for us an opportunity to find God in our hearts. How then do we answer the so-called wicked son's question? What then is the meaning of performing the Seder ritual? It is, in fact, a reminder that God took us out of slavery in Egypt with a strong hand and a mighty arm, so that we might serve God instead and thereby sanctify our lives. Shabbat Shalom.